Good morning. Please, if you'll be so kind. Thank you. As Lorena said, I am a physician. The one who mentioned there are no physicians here. I was very much surprised. I'm a family physician, an active one, and for the 5 last years, I served as a senior medical consultant to the Israeli Ministry of Health about the medical cannabis issues. Wait. Okay, let's skip as much as I can. I really like to call my presentation from illegal substance into very promising medication. I'll skip the ancient times. They were mentioned. Just one slide I don't want to skip because I'm a physician. How many of you are physicians? Well, not too many. But I believe all of you remember during the first days in the internship, in the night, with nobody to consult, we were keeping in our pockets the Merck manual. It's a book for a young physician to check everything he does not remember what to do. And in Merck manual, 120 years ago, there was a special chapter dedicated to cannabis. The usage, and believe me, it looks almost exactly like what we do today. I can argue about 1 or 2 things, but basically all those usages were accepted. They gave me 30 minutes for 60 minutes talk, so I'm going to skip a lot. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I was asked to emphasize the problem of recreational or social use versus medical use. And of course, it is an issue all over the world. Let me present my personal experience in the Israeli parliament. In each time I'm invited to the parliament to speak about cannabis, there is always some parliament member who asks me, what do you think about recreational usage or what usage opening to the public? My answer is always the same. Look, recreational, social use of cannabis is not a medical issue. Don't ask the physician to decide for you. You, the parliament, the government, or the highest court, you allowed use of alcohol. And it has its social price with road accident, liver problems, and others. You, as a society, decided nicotine is allowed with all the price of lung cancer and all other diseases. I can assure you one thing, that the usage, the open usage, the recreational usage of cannabis will have its social price. And the social price will be some hospitalization of psychiatric patients. But, so at that point, usually they say to me, okay, but as a senior representative of the Israeli Ministry of Health, you cannot sit here without having an opinion. So I say, okay, after establishing that this is a social question, not a medical, I can tell you my personal opinion, which is the price of using cannabis will be a lot less than the price of alcohol or nicotine. There are no free lunches. We will have problems connected to cannabis, but there will be a lot less than alcohol or nicotine. Now, about our experience. We have almost 9 million population. We approved during, the numbers are not exactly updated because it's moving so quick every day. We have now more than 80,000 approved licenses, but about 46 active patients. Active patients means the patient that took the cannabis during the last 3 months and used it for medical purposes. On the other hand, the numbers, not from the Ministry of Health, but from the police, they evaluation that we have more than 1 million people using cannabis for recreational purposes. You know, during the party, the weekend, or the full moon party, whatever. But this is nothing to concern with me as a physician. in our system, every physician, every specialist can recommend cannabis. The recommendation comes to my office. I have 15 physicians working with me, and they check the recommendation, approve it, and if they approve it, and we approve about 90% of the applications, of the requests, then I sign it, and the person is getting a license. Since it is still, unfortunately, not a medication, but a forbidden substance that is allowed to be used for medical purposes, we need to issue a license. This license is valid, of course, only inside the borders of Israel, and if one of my patients wants to go to have a nice time in Italy or France or London or New York, he better will not take the cannabis with him. In Singapore, it can cost him his life, as you know. But this is an extreme unique problem. Now, every day we have a lot, and we encourage research. At that moment, we have more than 300 ongoing research projects. 60 of them are clinical studies. And this is when somebody asked the previous panel, why aren't the physicians more open to this subject? I believe the answer is more difficult because, yes, physicians have a traditional way of thinking. They are used what they are taught in school, that's what they know. And even you meet some old physician like me 40 years later, he still believes that what he was taught in school is true. Now, our research is a poor research. Even in Israel, with all these research projects ongoing, we have a very little really good studies. We are very proud about some of them. They are good. I'll show it to you in a few seconds. But basically, let me give you an example how we must progress even if we don't have research. What about using cannabis during pregnancy or lactation? We still, I mean my generation, we still remember the trauma of the thalidomide. Those who remember it, we gave it to pregnant women, and the children were born without arms, legs. It was a terrible thing. Since then, we are very, very afraid of giving cannabis during pregnancy. But can you do a good research about it? Can you to give some of the group cannabis and to the other group nothing? It is difficult. Just one thing, we must learn sometimes not only from experiments. I want to remind you, those who remember, there was a Woodstock festival in the state. If you remember it, there were millions of young people that were in this festival doing three things. And the things were music, sex, and marijuana. So you would expect, after such an event, a lot of children with malformation, and they were not. So most probably, you can use cannabis during pregnancy. Please don't quote me as an official statement because it's too much. But once I was asked to approve cannabis to 15 weeks pregnant young woman, and I was afraid to allow it. So she went to court and sued me and things like that. At a certain point, I gathered on a phone call conversation all the best specialists in Israel about teratology, children malformation, pediatrics, gynecology. And we had a lot of debate, and it was summarized with one sentence that I believe is quoting of Churchill. When Churchill was 93 years old, he was asked, "How do you feel?" And his answer was, "Considering the alternative." And the alternative in that case was not good. So what can we offer to the pregnant woman when she has terrible pains, fibromyalgia or arthritis? We cannot offer opiates. We cannot offer, I don't know your names, that's Lyrica and Cymbalta, all those drugs, NSAIDs and others, COX. But at the end, you find yourself that the cannabis is the least dangerous substance of all. Now, you are still afraid, but this is a way that we should have to go. We have also a tremendous political and media influence. Our media is really pro-cannabis, and they would like to see it open. We are, according to our governmental decision, at that time want to promote as much as possible the medical usage and not make a decision about the recreational. Now, once again, what are our problems with the cannabis? So I mentioned the first thing, the EBM, evidence-based medicine. There are thousands and tens of thousands of case reports. Excellent. For example, the RSO, Rick Simpson oil. There are many reports, individual reports, that it works. There is not even one medical scientific study proving it is worth study. So we do try encourage as far as we can the research about this. And second thing, it was mentioned before, it is very complicated plant. With all the 600, 150 cannabinoids or all the others, when you need to prepare a research, you need a drug which is consistent, that will give it every day the same amount or the same infrastructure. And this is very difficult to achieve because many times I approve research and then the researcher is going to Helsinki committee in his hospital and they said to him, okay, we want first the medication with GMP approved. You don't have it, you can't do any research. The other thing that you already heard about, the entourage effect, many pharmaceutical companies tried. They said there are 600 ingredients. We want the only one who is active. But if they take the only one, it does not work. He needs what Professor Meshulam, our teacher, called it entourage effect, or in English, the family effect, familia. It works only coming with his all brothers, sisters, all his family. Then it works. One more issue about the smoking. Why is smoking so popular? Because in the cannabis is reactivated in 184 degrees Celsius. So if you smoke, it is activated, acts quickly. I mean, it works within 40 seconds. So a patient with severe pain, he wants the influence immediately. Under the tongue, it will take 40 minutes. So it's quite a difference. As a physician, I hate smoking. But we have some startups all over the world, we have also in Israel, of inhalers, like Ventolin or Seretide, I suppose you all know this, inhalers, with a heating device inside. So you can use the cannabis with inhaler and have all the effects, but on a medical way of thinking. And it has very little amount of cannabis inside, so it is of no use to thieves and to the black market. I want to skip as much as possible because now about ways of administration, it was mentioned smoking and through the lungs covers about 80% of the usage. 20% is the oil under the tongue, absorbed by the mucus under the tongue, works slowly, but for a lot more hours, 4, 6, even 8 hours, while smoking is active for 4 hours only. So many times we recommend the people who are going to sleep to take the drops under the oil drops under the tongue. Cookies. We use cookies once, but the results are very unpredictable. I mean, a person does not feel it so quick. So he eats a cookie and feels nothing. So he eats another one, feels nothing. After the third one, he feels everything. And what is even more dangerous, we were afraid of the children, of the grandchildren, eating the cookies of their grandmother, which is really unpleasant. It is not lethal. There is one thing very, very important to understand about cannabis. Even with the misuse, even using too much amount, even we had cases of small children that took the bottle of the grandmother and swallow the oil, it is not lethal. They will be drowsy for a day or two, but I didn't meet even one case of death because of wrong usage of cannabis. This is important. Another ways, future methods of administration that we consider, inhalers and mentioned, suppositoria for gastrointestinal problems, cutaneous administration, especially for diseases like psoriasis or like atopic dermatitis. It is very effective. Patches. Now the three last lines, each one is a huge industry. The first one, food supplements. Or using CBD, which is an issue that is in a process of change. There was a convention in Vienna with recommendation from many countries. I wrote our country recommendation to exclude the CBD out of the narcotic convention. As far as I know, in the next 2-3 months, there will be a meeting of WHO in Geneva, and I hope very much they will accept those recommendations and exclude the cannabis from the narcotic convention. That will mean that we'll be able to produce soup supplements with CBD, cosmetics. I saw my wife going in the street of Jamaica and looking at the things they sell in the streets, and they promise to the woman that you will take this ointment on your face, you will stay young and beautiful forever. Of course you will, but and one last issue, which each one of them is a huge industry. 2 months ago, I got a phone call from the director of the Tel Aviv Zoo. And he called me and said, look, I have a chimpanzee who is very old with severe arthritis. The animal suffers terribly. Please allow him cannabis. And my first answer was, why not? Then I thought about it a little. I am under constant fire from the press. You mean we approved 90% of the request? There is always one psychotic patient whom I wouldn't approve cannabis. And they go to the media and they tell about me and my mother things that I promise you are not true. I was very afraid of the media people to write in the papers, Dr. Dor didn't approve cannabis to my mother, but approved cannabis to the chimpanzee. It does not look good in the media. So our decision was, let's make a research. This is always good. You make a research about the influence of cannabis upon primates, chimpanzees, orangutan. I will allow you all the cannabis in the world. Unfortunately, the chimpanzee died quicker before we could do it. Ways of administration, we already mentioned everything. Research for future indications, which I believe is very important. One of the first things, and somebody mentioned here before, cannabis is considered to be useful in detoxification from narcotics. I mean, if you have a patient and you give him cannabis and you can stop the narcotics, and it is possible, then he's not addicted. It was mentioned before, cannabis is not addictive substance. Cannabis can be used without any addiction. There is a tolerance, which was mentioned, of course, during the years, maybe you have to increase the amount, but it's not addiction. It's a tolerance, it's kind of a habit, it's psychological adherence, because you feel good, you don't want to stop it. But if from any reason you stop the cannabis, you don't have this kind of result of kriza, this behavior of narcotic patient that was taken off narcotics. No, you don't have it. You have the usual behavior of the patient. Head trauma, this is something interesting. I gave a lecture a few years ago in Harvard Medical School, and after my lecture, they told me, look, stay here, there is something very interesting. What was that? They brought 4 American football players, those huge guys, 2 meters high and 2 meters wide. And they told their experience with cannabis. They got a lot of head trauma during the games, even through the helmets. And they have a kind of practice to use cannabis after the games to reduce the edema and the head trauma. And they say it works. Well, there were 4 guys, and 3 were very eloquent, very interesting stories. The first one, I had the feeling that they didn't give him enough cannabis. I mentioned psychiatric disorders. Today, we believe that acute psychosis is contraindication to cannabis. There are very little contraindications to cannabis, but active psychosis, we believe it's one of them, but it is because only we don't know yet all the ingredients my colleague mentioned. I believe that one day we'll know more about the subtypes of THC. We may be using them also for psychiatric disorders. I mentioned psoriasis, atopic dermatitis. Tinnitus. Tinnitus is an example of disease that you don't know what to do with. And this is today the usual way. If you don't know how to treat anything, you try cannabis. So we did try cannabis and it didn't work, unfortunately, but let's see in the future. Immune diseases, graft versus host disease. For those who are not physicians, it's a terrible disease when you give bone marrow transplantation to the patient. Sometimes, and before you do it, you give medication and chemotherapy and the radiation to the patient, so he will have no immune system to resist the implantation of the bone marrow from other person. And sometimes, in a very high percentage, even 50% of the patient, the donated blood marrow, the donor, attacked the host. And the result is death in 50%. One of our researchers, Professor Ori's name, and he gave cannabis to those patients before the bone marrow transplantation. And he proved a real reduction in death rate of those patients. Because the cannabis, as far as we know, is reducing the autoimmune wrong reaction. In our approval process, every physician can recommend, and now we start a new system that will be delivered with quality control in pharmacies. We are at the beginning of this process, and I believe we'll go on with this. Now, the data I need to approve cannabis are several things. One, we believe that we, at this stage, for the time being, approve cannabis only after exhausting the usual treatment. I mean, for example, in Crohn's disease, we don't start with cannabis. We say the gastroenterologist must start with the usual medications. If it fails, okay, let's go to cannabis. 40% of our patients are oncology patients, and it makes them feel better, eat better. It's palliative treatment. It does not cure cancer. And it's very difficult to convince people because they see the cancer patient having cannabis and feeling a lot better. So they think it's cured. No. But after saying that, I must mention that we have a few research in Israel. Those guys took the cannabis, and we mentioned the 150 ingredients, and he said, okay, Maybe we need the entourage effect, but we don't need all the 150. So we took 75 of them and saw that it stops development of cancer cells, apoptosis of cells. And that is not yet cure to cancer, but it is a really, really interesting thing to check out. Then he took 30 of them, until at the end of the process, he identified 4 cannabinoids that all of them together stop apoptosis of cancer. Not every cancer, but only specific pathways, different types of cannabis stop development of different cancer cells. And this is something, maybe this is the first step to find a real cure to cancer. But once again, hold your horses, don't rush. 30%, I need to go quick, I apologize. 30% of the patients, it is intractable pain after failure of all other medications. I would to see in this indication giving cannabis quicker because it has a lot less side effects than the opiates, but it's a matter of time. Neurology, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson, Tourette, all of them feel a lot better and less pain with cannabis. Now, 2 of researchers we are very proud about. The first one is children epilepsy. We have almost 1,000 children treated for epilepsy. 50% of them stop convulsing almost entirely. 30%, the number of the convulsions was reduced from 100, 200 a day to less than 20 a day, which is a significant difference. 20% didn't respond to the treatment. We don't know why. Autistic spectrum. We have more than 1,000 children treated for autism with unbelievably good results. I got a phone call a few months ago from a mother. She said to me, look, Dr. Go, you don't know me, but you gave cannabis, you allowed cannabis to my child, and he, for the first time in his life, hugged me and called me mother. This is not research, it's a human thing. Neurology, ALS, fibromyalgia, we have more than 1,000 patients treated for this. Head trauma, I mentioned, gastroenterology, Crohn's, unbelievably good results, ulcerative colitis. I mentioned psychiatry. Somebody mentioned glaucoma. I don't think so. The American Ophthalmology Society and the Israeli checked it, and the summary was that it does not help to glaucoma. You need to take amounts of cannabis which are impossible to make any difference. We have a problem with overcrowded pain clinic. I want to save it. We have the problem of driving under influence of cannabis, which I believe we should be more permissive. Only if a person takes huge amount of cannabis, he cannot drive. With small amount, especially if used to it, for example, those oncology patients, they are allowed to drive as long as they take opiates. But the moment they are in cannabis, it starts to be a problem. Controversial issues. I gave this lecture in the States, and they were very quiet until this slide. They like it. Treatment during hospitalizations. The physicians in the hospital didn't like the patients to smoke in the hospital, so we allowed especially oil to be used under the tongue, and of course only if the physician in the department allow it. Last week the Israeli government approved export, which is, I believe it's a huge step forward for us. We need more research, a really good research, and we are doing our best to promote it. We even created a very specific guidelines to the agriculture on the parts. I can't go into this, standardization, and all our knowledge, the farm here, skip it. And just to end with one story I like, it is about an old lady that was given cannabis, and there were some doubts about the indication. So a month after that, the staff called her and asked her, "Grandma, did it help you?" And her answer was, "For the disease, it helped a little. But my grandchildren are coming visiting me a lot." Thank you.